Now this is a knife, but more specifically it's a Damascus steel fighting knife. It has a story to tell though, and you'll see me put gold and silver inlay in it along with carving the handle. Without any further ado, let's begin. Now this journey starts a little different than most, as we're actually going to get in the car rather than light the forge. You see, we're going to Silas Blacklow and Gabriel Turner's workshop. These are two awesome smiths that I met at a bladesmithing event up in Maine. We've decided to try and make the Damascus pattern for the knife here. The first thing we're going to do is sit down and decide upon a design. Originally, I advocated for a wider, recurve, more traditional style Bowie knife, whereas Silas and Gabriel advocated for a narrower blade. In the end, I'm super happy they did this, as I think the end result is much better. Now that we have a design, we can start to make our pattern. And for this, we're going to take some offcuts that they had prepared in advance. These are basically just offcuts they had from other Damascus projects, and we're going to forge them all down to the same dimensions, that way we can cut them up and layer them to create a higher layer count. Now that they're all down to the same width and thickness, what we're going to do is clean them off with a belt grinder. Whenever you're doing anything with Damascus, you want to make sure that all your surfaces are properly clean. That'll help to make sure the forge weld actually sticks. Once these pieces have been cleaned though, and they're at a place that we're happy with them, what we're going to do is stack them up another time and weld them together. This will be the second weld of the day, and as before, this is simply to achieve a higher layer count for our end pattern. Now that those pieces have been welded though, we're going to let them get up to temperature in the forge. From here, Silas is going to go to a 12-ton press and basically just begin to set those welds. All he's really doing here is closing up the gaps that might be in between the layers. Now that those have been closed up though, what he's going to do next is go back and apply more pressure. This will fully set the weld. From here we can move on over to the little giant power hammer, which you'll see Gabriel using, and that is basically just to draw out the bar. Power hammers are ultimately more efficient machines as they actually can help generate heat, whereas the press can often suck out heat of the billet. This is because of the amount of energy that's transferred into the piece whenever the power hammer strikes it, making it a lot more ideal for drawing out long bars like this. Once we get this bar down to a more manageable width though, what we're going to do is move on over to the anvil and make sure everything is nice and straight. From here, we're going to take it and let it cool down, and then we're going to cut it up again. Now, this is technically a tile weld, and so what we're going to make sure we do is have every surface clean before cutting it up into 5 smaller chunks. Tile welds are one of the trickiest type of forge weld you can do, as it seems like they always want to fail. And the big thing that they do here is they let it soak in the forge for an extended period of time. This is to help carbon migrate through the entire piece and help create a more homogeneous billet that we can later forge a blade out of. After setting the welds on the press as before, Silas moves on over to the power hammer to basically just do the final couple of taps before I'm going to go in there with a hot cutting tool and begin to make our feather pattern. Now, feather pattern Damascus is really neat stuff, as essentially you're taking a hot cutting tool and you're basically pinching down through the middle of the billet. This pulls the layers towards the center, and then when you re-weld it, you get this really beautiful feather or almost leaf-like pattern. Now that it's been cut through, what we're going to do is take an angle grinder and basically just get the rest of the way through at the bottom. The reason we're not worried about cutting it the whole way to the bottom with the hot cutting tool is because the very bottom of the billet is going to be sacrificial material anyhow for our tang. Now that it's been split in half though, we had a little bit of an issue, and that was that whenever I had the hot cutting tool inside the power hammer, I didn't exactly cut it the most straight. To fix this, we're just going to throw the bigger piece into the forge again, and basically just forge it down closer to the dimensions of the other piece. And from here, we're going to do our last major weld for the day, and that is to basically weld these pieces back together and then forge weld them. Once it has been welded though, we can start to work on our preform for our blade. I requested that we do an integral guard for this project, and thankfully Silas and Gabriel just so happen to be wizards. This is where forge welding can get a little tricky, as now we have hundreds of seams running in all different directions. The billets really like to break apart at this stage, and so you have to proceed very carefully. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert, as Silas and Gabriel were real masters here, but essentially what they were doing was they made a couple isolations, one for the tang, one for the guard lugs, and then one for the blade. From here, it's basically just exaggerating that transition so that we have sharp lines, and that helps me out later when I go to grind it. As I said, I did most of the watching here, as this was just truly a sight to behold, especially from someone like myself who hasn't seen a lot of any regards forged. Now, we ran into an issue where at the tip of the billet where the weld seam was, actually began to split apart on us. Well, to fix this, Silas decided to do a fish mouth weld. What this is you basically cut in a V shape on the end of the billet, and then you forge those down together and weld them. Not only does this fix the weld flaw we had, but it also makes a pattern actually wrap around to the tip of the blade. I'm super happy that I got to see this done, as now I know how to do a fish mouth. Now that the weld has been set though, we're pretty much done at their shop. We ended up running out of time, and I had to bring it to my home shop where I finished forging. Now this is where things get a little tricky, as I actually lost some of the footage on my camera card. Fortunately though, I was able to film some on my iPhone, so I can explain the final bit of pattern manipulation that I did. I started by grinding in these little divots alongside the blade. This is to create the pattern which currently runs perpendicular to the guard, and basically make it snake or serpentine up across the blade. Once that's been straightened out then, I do a couple touch-up things to the guard lugs, and then I normalize. Now I normalize 3 times to prepare for grinding and inlay. Now whenever I went to grind this blade, fortunately most of the shaping work was already done at the anvil. All I had to do was go in with some files and some rough grits and basically just add in the final bit of sculpting in order to prepare me for my inlay. Now you guys have seen me grind a knife 1,000 times, so I'm going to skip right to the engraving on this one. I really want to take a moment and just showcase this forgotten art and the beauty that it holds in its practice. I have the knife set here in an engraver's pitch. What I'm going to do now is go through and create the leaf that I'm going to be engraving on the guard of this knife. So I'm going to start with a piece of 16 gauge silver. Now I chose to do a chrysanthemum motif here, as this is a fall based project. Chrysanthemums bloom in the fall time, and I thought it was appropriate. The first thing I'm going to do is draw up my design on the silver sheet. From there I'll pierce it out, before laying that on the guard and basically drawing an outline. Then after that, I'm going to go through with a V-graver and create an outline. It's important to stay within the shape so that you don't have these gaps on the finished piece. From there, I'll go in with a flat chisel and basically just remove the material where the inlay will go. Now this will be a raised inlay, so I don't have to go the thickness of the sheet, rather just about half or a little more. Now that all the material's been removed, what we're going to do is go through with that same flat chisel and basically dovetail the edges. This raises up a lip that then whenever I strike my inlay in, I'm able to go around and basically close it up. This creates a super strong mechanical bond and ensures that piece of silver isn't going anywhere. Now that the inlay's in there, the only thing left to do is rough shaping. For this, I use a variety of different chisels to basically go through and add in our rough sculpt that'll be refined later on after heat treat. I repeated these steps to inlay a chrysanthemum flower on the other side before it's time for the scariest part of the entire project, heat treating it with the inlay in it. I slowly and gently heat it up, starting with the tang and working my way towards the blade. I keep a constant eye making sure I'm not overheating the inlay. Once the piece is up to the desired temperature though, I'm going to be quenching in Parks 50 oil. You can see here I'm a big dummy and didn't have a tank that was big enough, so I ended up having to tilt the bucket back. Don't worry, I fixed this in future videos and now I have a legitimate quenching tank. All that being said, I clamped it in a vise to hopefully keep things straight as it cooled down to room temperature, and then I tempered it. Once I've ground off the scale, it's time to do some edge performance testing. For this, I'm going to use some basic mod steel and just go in there and bash the edge into it. Alright, safety first, got my safety glasses. Alright, let's
without ending the clip, just so you guys know I'm not lying. You can see there's no damage. What save cannot be said about this this piece of steel here. Now it's time to start polishing.
So what I'm going to be doing first is go in with a 120 grit belt. This will allow me basically to touch up and finalize my grinds before we move on to hand sanding. Now this knife in particular has more of a dagger grind than your traditional Bowie. All that being said though, it still is an asymmetrical grind. I'm aiming for a sort of diamond shape where the blade transitions into the guard. I think it looks really cool, especially with the end result and how the pattern flows through it. Now I end up calling it a little bit short with the grinder, and that's so that I can go in with 180 grit sandpaper and basically clean up my grinds rather than risk slipping on the grinder. Okay, so that didn't last long. I ended up deciding I wanted to fit up the handle before I polished the blade. So the first thing I gotta do is sharpen up my tang transition. I wanna get it down to something more manageable and easy to work with without losing the integrity of it. Once this has been done, I'm gonna take a block of Siamese rosewood and we're gonna drill a hole in it. Now, a little secret is that if you're doing a recessed fit like this, the hole does not have to be perfect, because most of it will get filled in with epoxy later on. The key is simply to not over drill and then end up breaking through into that hole later on when you shape the handle. Okay, so now that the knife fits down in the handle block, what I'm going to do is take a ball burr and a flex shaft and basically go through and now recess that guard to sit down into the handle. This will create this really beautiful kind of organic effect. And yeah, quit talking and let's just do it. Alright. Now a trick for fitting recessed bolsters into wood like this is whenever you get it close, place it on the tang and then hammer it down. What'll happen is the metal will actually show you on the block of wood where it's catching. Then you just simply go in with a ball burr and remove that material as needed. Once it does fit nice and tight, what we're going to do is start roughing out the shape of this handle. Now because I'm doing a sculptural handle, I want to retain the basic ergonomic shape that I would usually use, but leave a little extra meat so I can carve in the root-like effect I'm going for. Speaking of carving, we're going to go upstairs again and begin carving this handle. Now, because I've done most of the rough work on the belt grinder, all I really need to do is now go through the pencil and draw up some lines. Once I've decided where the roots need to go, I'm going to go through with a smaller ball burr and just start to chew out those lines. This helps create the framework for the overall shape and design, and then from there I'm going to take a file that I broke the tip off of to basically act as a scraper. This allows me then to scrape away wood as needed and create these really beautiful rounded over shapes. From there, it's just a matter of using some sandpaper to round things over a little bit more, as well as get the whole thing up to the final finish that you're looking for. Alright, so now the knife handle's been completely carved. Now the next step is to finish hand sanding this blade and get everything up to the final grit before we'll do our final etch. I'm super excited with this thing, and yeah, let's go ahead and use some elbow grease and get this thing polished. Alright, now something that's also really cool to note here is I'm actually using hand sanding in order to clean up my grinds. Something that I tell people is don't be so afraid of doing a little extra work to get the result that you want. That sounds weird to say and kind of stupid to even bring that up, but it's the reality. If you can't fix something on the grinder or you don't feel confident grinding something, then use hand sanding. Like, it'll only take probably an extra few minutes, really. I mean, ideally, with a low grit, just simply to fix some grind. Again, just don't be afraid to do that little bit of extra work that'll really separate the end result from just, half doing it and then having a result that you're not proud of. So, alright, so now we're going to go ahead and etch the blade. So what I've done is I'm basically going to rinse the blade off and wash it with Dawn dish soap water. That'll get all the oils and grease off. That way when it goes into the ferric, there's no sort of oil spots that would prevent from even etching. Okay, so I etch my blades in cycles. This one is only the first one out of 3. Basically, you let it sit in the ferric for a couple minutes, you pull it out, rinse it off, and then scrub it with some 2000 grit sandpaper to get rid of those oxides. You then repeat this until you get to the desired depth of etch that you're looking for. Once I'm happy with the depth though, what I'm going to do is pull it out, polish it one more time, before going into an instant coffee mix. This is just an instant coffee from Nescafe, but it produces a really beautiful contrast on the blade. From here I'm going to let it sit for a little bit until I'm happy with the color of the blade, and then it's just simply final glue up and the blade is done.